loaded French fry, loaded fries.
Sure.
And the Alamo bowl,
Alamo bowl, sure. Do you have any chickens in Alamo bowl?
What chickens?
Like grilled chicken or fried chicken, do you Alamo bowl?
Okay, fried chicken.
All right. Love it. Are you doing cash or card, sir?
Oh, it does, they're gonna pay for it.
If it's, so you guys get $20, and then once you pass $20, anything past that $20, you have to pay for yourself.
Oh, okay, you should have mentioned that before.
They told me you guys did that.
No, I didn't know that. They didn't say that in the first,
So
okay,
if
so.
it is past $20, which I believe it is, do you know?
Okay, then I have to change the whole order then, hopefully.
You want to cancel everything?
Yeah, cancel the order.
All right.
I have to rethink it now.
Sure. Yeah, they told me you guys knew that. If you need time, like I said, that's okay. I need to make sure
Yeah,
that-
okay, yeah, come back to me.
Yeah.
Give me some thought here. Give some thought here. So, our limit is $20.
It's like you get $20, and anything past that, you pay for it.
Right, okay.
But yeah, if you want something, like I said, just write it down, put it up, hit this button, come by and get it.
Okay, right.
There we go, man. You done? Yeah, write it down, put it up, with that button, come by and get it. If you do anything, will it be cash or card? You don't get the card to you now in that case, just in case it was past $20?
A little bit later.
Sure. Thank you. How's it going, man? You been out on the job time before?
No, I heard.
You heard the whole thing? So anything I can do for you right now, man?
No, I'm good right now.
Okay, yeah, just write it down, put it up, hit that button, I'll come by and get it for you. If it does pass $20, do you know if you're gonna be cash or card?
It won't pass $20.
Cool, works for me. Aha, you see, you got a thing written up for me. Yep.
Is there a way to make this auto?
Gotcha, thank you. You got it. How's it going, sir? Hey, you been out on the draft house before?
No.
Cool. I will break it down for you. It's real easy. On the menu, need it? Right in here. Don't put your bag somewhere. There's also a hook under your table, just so you know.
Thank you.
Yes, how it works is you see something you like.
I'm very sleep. Do you have any drop here?
Yes, I will show you right now. Okay. As you go down the list, they get darker. So anything is like, they start off light. As you go down, they get darker, darker, darker.
Oh.
To get to the side. So anything above the side is the dark.
Okay, that's included in the order, right?
If you need some time, it's okay.
Any suggestion?
Are you in the, what do you want like an IPA? Like IPA? Do you want something on the stronger side or something that's more like? I think like the best ones would be like the Coney Island Birdman.
Yep, I heard about it.
Yeah, I think a Flower Power also is a little stronger, but it's also pretty good. Any of the Dogfishes are also pretty good as well.
Yeah. The darker side, what do you use?
For darker IPAs, I would say the Ithaca Flower Power or the Sloop Juice Bomb. Those also be stronger too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try the Coney Island.
The Birdman. Sure.
All right, well, the automatic scrolling on that isn't working, but that's the
If your bill doesn't pass
QR
$20,
code
sir,
for the
you don't
meetup
need to
group
cash the card.
is there.
Thank you.
So,
You want to look at the card figure now, just in case?
Yeah.
Do we have to gather?
And if it doesn't pass it, then it's okay. But if it does, it should still pass.
my partner in crime is doing it. I suckered my friends.
I hope you're compensating them somehow.
Yeah, anything past $20 is like on your guys' tab. So yeah, if you want anything else, sir, just write it down, put it up in the bracket.
Where's the snack?
Who made the
Sure,
logo?
the rest of the
Did you
menu.
make the logo with
Yeah,
the
so you know,
Statue of
it's
Liberty?
A friend of mine.
But if you want,
I yelled at him
that's
because
you
he
take the
did
pen and
one.
card, you write down what you want.
open.
You put it up, and then there's a button
He
back.
found, I made him go
Open
to
document format.
he had to go-
Yeah.
No, and he
That
had
might
to
will come on
find
time if he
a
wants
public
to come by.
domain.
Oh,
Statue of
Statue of
Liberty
Liberty.
picture.
How's it going, sir?
That's awesome.
Doing it over again? You got this real? Anything I can do for you right now?
No, I'll write it down.
Who's that, buddy?
You got it.
How's it going, guys? I do not, I think it's, yeah, man.
So welcome everybody to the July meeting. We'll get started in another 5 minutes or so. We'll just let some time for late arrivals to get in here and everything. So relax, enjoy yourself for a few minutes, and we'll get everybody some food. Oh, hey, how you doing?
You guys can combine, and then it'll be like $20.
What thing to combine? There's plenty. I'm not reclining, I know it. But no, I want to think like more. No.
I mean, right now, I can't tell you about the tax, but as of right now, it's like, you're past 20. It's 18, 15, and 17. So like right now, both you guys are pretty much good in that area. Sure. All right. It's 2 Sprites or 1 Sprite? If it does pass $20, you guys are in cash. You might best swap the card for you right now. If you don't pass it, then it's okay. But if you do, I already have it. Alright. So yeah, anything else, just write it down, put it up, press the buttons, come by and get it. There's a bag somewhere that's hooked under your table, just so you guys know. No problem. That's done. It's impervious flame. Whatever, you got to go to IPA. There's an IPA, there's a what do you want to get to? Or do you want to get
I know, I'm not the server, I'm the.
you guys,
There's a screen back there that tells me it's seats on.
okay, I understand. I understand. If you do want anything else, just write it down, put it up in the bracket, and then press the button on the side, and I'll come right here. I do what I gotta do. You guys are doing like one bill as of right now, or you want to do you're on your own? Sure. Good day. Oh, no, it was just what else was, everyone is doing order to it. And on top of that, you want to, well, you can. That's all right. There you go. It's gone. This is it. See some of these lights, everyone's card, pen, you write down whatever it is you want. You put that card in the bracket, it's press the button, that light comes on. Anything I can do for you right now? So what I was told is you guys get about $20, and then if you pass that, it's on your own. Everything, whatever it is. If you want to pass it around, it's $20. I'm the tech person. Everything I do for you right now, sir. I'm not sure entirely how, like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna figure out how to divide it up later. But once you pass the $20, anything past that will be on your own tab. Wow. If you need some time, that's okay. If it does pass $20, you know if you do the branch card. Monday the card fee right around. That way, well, that way, if it does pass it, I can just wipe it and get back to you. And that way, if it does, I already if it doesn't, that's okay too.
Is that too far back for you? Nah.
Get down to the,
Press that button.
All right, so welcome everybody to the July 2022 live in-person NYRHUG. So yay, we're back. We were back last month too with a whole bunch of folks, so glad to see that a bunch more folks came out. So this is, last month everybody really liked having it at Alamo, and we definitely fed that back to the powers that be back in the marketing and sales groups that help pay for this, because I can't pay for this out of my budget for sure. But so far so good. They're happy. We'll keep them happy. We keep making sure, keep registering for things, invite some other folks to come along with you. Make sure you check in when you get here, because that's how they keep track of who comes to these things and all that, so that they will keep paying for us to have this really nice place to have the meeting at. Couple of logistics and housekeeping things. So we changed the food, as you guys have already heard a little bit. We changed the food around a little bit because last month we had, a few of those folks that we won't talk about too much that went a little crazy on the food and ordered a whole dinner for 5 or something at their seat. So what we're doing today, so you get $20 towards your food and bev here. We have a minimum spend number with them. So, and I will be communicating with the folks in the back to see where we're at, and if we're not hitting our minimum spend, we'll bump everybody up another couple of bucks until we get to the minimum spend, so that we're not. But so apologize for making that change, but people kind of forced my hand on that last month a little bit, and so we're just trying to be fair to everybody and make sure we don't go too crazy on my budget people. So
The guy said 25.
okay. I suspect we'll probably get to that because we're only about halfway full right now, so we'll see how we do. But once, we'll definitely bump it till we get to the minimum spend number, and then once we get past that, we'll have, whatever you guys go over with by a little bit, we'll ask you guys to cover. So, all right. Okay, so let's get on with our presentation here. So this month we are going to be talking about Ceph and OpenShift Data Foundation, which is, I think, the third iteration of naming for software-defined storage inside OpenShift. Essentially, it's a fancy name for saying OpenShift, Ceph running inside of OpenShift. So our speaker today is Sheldon Mustard. Sheldon has been in IT for a good many moons, like some of the others of us that have more gray hair than. But he came to Red Hat through the InkTank acquisition. InkTank is the company that was doing Ceph before Ceph was part of Red Hat. And so that was, I think, 9 years with InkTank and another 8 years now at Red Hat. So he's been technical expert on a number of the accounts that I've worked on, helping customers with their Ceph usage and both technical sales as well as engineering stuff. So without further ado, I will pass over to Sheldon here.
Was there anything important in any of the other slides?
Nope.
Give me 1 second. I will transition.
Yeah, so thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming out, spending time away from your family, or leaving the office a little earlier than you usually do. So appreciate you coming out and hanging out with us for a little while. My goal for today is, I guess I hate the word, but kind of evangelize a couple products in our portfolio. As Patrick mentioned, and thanks Patrick for introducing me, by the way. As Patrick mentioned, Ceph has been a important sort of data storage, if you will, type of product within Red Hat for a little while, and ODF, OpenShift Data Foundation, has been as well. So those are basically the two products. I'm going to do a little intro, do a little bit talking about Ceph and the commercial product that we have called Red Hat Ceph Storage, or HCS, and then transition into ODF, again, which is OpenShift Data Foundation, and then a short demo on ODF, and we could just, for the last hour, just kind of basically chat. I'm going to set my timer so I leave enough enough time for Q&A, and we can get started. And feel free, I don't want to listen to myself talk for an hour either, so, yell or throw something at me if you've got any questions. So, in forums like this, where I don't know you guys very well, normally I'm talking to a customer, right? So, I have a bit of info. I find it useful if I just say who I am so that you pay attention. So you think I have something useful to say. So I won't go over the whole thing, but basically I grew up in Ontario, and when I joined Ink Tank I had to move to the US, so that's when I moved to New York City. My funny joke about that is I grew up watching Seinfeld. I like the Yankees, so I was like, as a kid, I'm like, I want to live in New York City, play for the Yankees, blah, blah, blah. And drive a Porsche. That was the other detail. I don't know why. I liked Porsches at the time. But now I live in New Jersey and I drive a Hyundai, so I haven't quite obtained my goals. But yeah, that was kind of when I joined, or when I moved, relocated to New York City. So kind of why I'm here today. They were looking for someone to speak about these topics, so that's why they pulled me in. And I guess the only other thing I would mention is that I've been with Red Hat for a while. No company's perfect, but I'm pretty proud of what we do, both in the open source community and from a commercial perspective. And just to set the stage a little bit, I thought it made sense to, and I actually shamelessly pulled this off of Wikipedia, but basically just pull out some of the acquisitions that Red Hat's done over the years related to storage, if you will. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar, probably lots, but the GFS reference there is not Google file system. It's a global file system. And so the reason I thought it made sense to sort of present this was because, from these acquisitions come people and technologies. So, each of these acquisitions had people that came along with it and resources that Red Hat put towards all these different technologies. And you'll see through the presentation, I'll make reference to a few of them that are still in our portfolio. Others have been somewhat rolled into RHEL. So the first one up there was initially put into RHEL, and Permabit, the second last one here, a lot of that technology went into just the RHEL product. So the other one that I pulled out, which isn't totally storage focused, but it does have a big impact because storage and whatever the compute platform are quite related, right? So KVM plays a big part, and still does today in the virtualization products that Red Hat has in their portfolio. So a lot of these storage technologies, interact a lot with the virtualization layer as well. So, and I thought I would sort of address the elephant in the room. So for anybody that's, even followed Red Hat that much at all, will probably ask about Gluster. And so this is the funniest I could be. Back when my kids were quite young, there was an ant bully movie that they really liked. And if you know at all about Gluster, the sort of mascot or the community, their thing is kind of an ant. So, and we have a habit at Red Hat of getting tattoos when we're very passionate about things. So he kind of looks like a Ceph admin. So I gave him a Ceph tattoo and had him kind of going against Gluster. But to be honest, I have a ton of respect for AB and all the people that came before us in the Gluster space, and they had a great community. They continue to have a great community. We've end of lifed most of the products, right, if not all of the products related to Gluster, and a lot of the people have transitioned either to other organizations that use Gluster or into products that either use Ceph or other technologies within Red Hat. So the great thing about open source in general and Red Hat is that the community of Gluster will continue, and companies like Facebook, Intuit, there's a bunch that still substantially use Gluster, so they're not they're not without support, whatever you define as support, but they have a community and they have a bunch of developers that still work on Gluster. So it's sort of something I figured I should address, and I tried to do it in a funny way. Hopefully I won't get in trouble. So moving on to more focus on sort of what we have today in the Red Hat portfolio around storage, if you will. There's a bit of a movement to move away from storage as a term, and you'll notice on the far right, this product doesn't have storage in the name, so that's done on purpose. I think we probably weren't as successful as we may have liked to have been competing against all the storage vendors, and there's some great storage vendors out there, so I think we've somewhat transitioned to this sort of data approach and not getting sort of pigeonholed as a storage product, if you will. But starting on the left, the product that's been around the longest that's still very active in the portfolio is what we call Red Hat Ceph Storage, so RHCS. And it was very much driven by OpenStack. So if you wind the clock back a little bit and remember that OpenStack was the thing once upon a time, and we still have a shipping product, around what we call OSP, the OpenStack platform, and it's pretty tightly integrated with Ceph, and a lot of customers use Ceph as the storage solution for most of the storage requirements around OpenStack. And it really drove a lot of the, for instance, acquisition of Inktank was sort of near the higher hype cycle, if you will, of OpenStack. So yeah, there's that one. There's standalone Ceph, is what we refer to it sometimes. So this is just RHCS, where you would use the object lock and file technologies and sort of run and maintain your storage system irregardless of the platform or compute layer. And then somewhat newer, but has been around for a little while, as Patrick mentioned, we had a few I don't know if you'd call them false starts, but we've had a few iterations and we've learned a lot over the years, and we think we have a pretty good product now around using Ceph and some other open source technologies that we'll talk about to build a product that complements OpenShift and adds some functionality to it. We call it OpenShift Data Foundations. I guess my quick synopsis would be that it's an abstraction layer irregardless of the infrastructure layer of storage to give you a consistent storage abstraction within OpenShift for your persistent data is kind of my elevator pitch for that, if you will. Yeah, so as I said, we're going to talk about two products. We're going to quickly talk, well, I don't know how quickly. I had 30 minutes dedicated to it. We'll see how it goes. But we're first going to talk about Ceph, and then what you learn from Ceph. You'll see why, you may or may not see why, we have ODF as a somewhat simpler way of using Ceph. So as is the case with all Red Hat technologies, it's important to first talk about the upstream open source community. that's really where, the innovation happens and where, we pull the technology from, right? So I'll have a few slides here and just talk a little bit about the Ceph community, and maybe tell you a story or two. I haven't given a prezo to a large group for a while, so I'll just tell you an anecdotal story that, usually I talk to small teams. It's probably been a few years with COVID. It takes quite a bit to get me across the bridge these days. So I did some Googling about giving, a prezo to a large group, and they're like, tell stories, tell jokes, be funny. And it's kind of like, be tall, dark, and handsome, and you won't have any trouble with girls. So I'll try my best to weave in a few stories and a few jokes. So Ceph has been around longer than both Ink Tank and, well, not Red Hat's been around longer than Ceph, but Ceph has been around much longer than any of the commercial products based around them. So Sage started a company fresh out of college with some friends from Harvey Mudd, a very successful, prestigious computer science related program. So they started DreamHost, which was a hosting company. And as some of you probably know, hosting was kind of cloud before the cloud. And they, it's a competitive industry, and they spend a lot of money on storage. They spend a lot of money on networking. So DreamHost actually spun out Ink Tank and spun out a software-defined networking company as well. So Sage did some research and design before he actually sort of started prototyping Ceph within DreamHost. So that's basically just to tell you that Ceph is a bit unique in that aspect. Most open source projects have more of you sort of scratch an itch and fix a problem. You don't really spend a lot of time doing design work, but he actually did a dissertation paper and all that around actually designing a solution around Ceph. And so this open source community has grown from that, and it's been a very vibrant community over the years. Everything kind of goes in waves. Different companies get involved. Other competitors to Red Hat, other Linux distros, other different companies. So it's a very good community, and it's pretty inviting. It's a harder technology to use. Probably not, the first open source project that you might want to get involved in, but if you're so inclined, and there's lots of opportunities that aren't just core developers as well, right? So there's lots of it's a great open source community if you're interested in it. And as we talk about the Ceph community, it's important we like to kind of highlight the amount of contribution we get, how it's very global in contributions, how there's a variety of vendors involved. It's an interesting community in that different hardware and software vendors are interested in the technology, and so you get a large gamut of both vendors and customers using Ceph, and some at a relatively large scale. CERN has been a big user at a large scale for a long time. And in case you're wondering, the term Ceph comes from cephalopod, and so the naming is in alphabetical order based on different cephalopods. So if we zoom in sort of on where we are today, the current release is called Pacific, and our Red Hat Ceph storage product 5 is based on Pacific. So it's useful to know that. And Quincy's not too far off as well. So That's great.
Anything I can do
So
for
it's a few years ago, actually it's been a couple of years now, we made a few changes, the community made changes democratically around the release cycles and getting them to last a little longer and get them a little more consistent.
Is it in cash record?
So it's been a good group.
You gotta pay for it today? If it's past $20.
Yeah, so we have a quick info slide here around sort of the data we're getting from telemetry within the SAF, and allows us to, report on, it is anonymized, or it can be, or it is by default, but some of these people use their own emails and stuff, so we are able to glean a little bit of
No wine?
info about who's using what. I believe the organizers are going to send the deck to everybody afterwards, and so the ask here is if you do happen to be using SEF Upstream, it is really easy to turn on telemetry.
There's a contract signed
If
that
you have
once it passes
connectivity
$20 in the
from
tab,
clusters,
anything above that, you will pay for yourself.
and it has been very well vetted as far as
Everything. Once the tab in
not
general passes
exposing
$20.
interesting things that security adversaries might be interested in.
So we don't have ginger ale. We have Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Sprite. Coke Zero, sure. Yeah.
And then a quick transition to the productized version that Red Hat has. So you can see these aren't quite the same scale, but we do have some
Take your time.
substantial customers
Look
running
at that. Once you figure
Red
out
Hat
what you
Set
like,
storage, and
just write it down.
having it
Put it in
in
this bracket.
relatively
and then
business
press this
critical
button, and it'll come back.
places within their organization. So
Thank you. No problem.
that's kind of the pitch. And I think a lot of you are probably from the financial sector, but I'm sure there's others in different areas of industry. So you can see it's a pretty broad spectrum. And usually at Red Hat, we do that sort of by verticals or by sectors rather than naming customers in particular.
You know about the $20 tab?
And I think this is the last slide on the community piece, but what we try to do, and it's admittedly a bit of a tightrope to walk, is we say, we contribute a ton to the project, but it also is a very vibrant community with contributions from lots of different places. So in one sense, people come to Red Hat because we have a lot of the core contributors. Something that you don't see in this is that the core maintainers, a lot of them are Red Hat people. And that resonates a lot of times with customers as well. They want to know that you're, a lot of the core maintainers are Red Hat employees, and that helps them have confidence to do business with you. And so I don't know how engaging I've been so far, but I was hoping to convince you that it might make sense to learn about Ceph. It's very much, I guess I would say, if you're building clouds, whether they're container or Kubernetes related, or if they're virtualization technology related, it might make sense to learn a bit about Ceph. Over the years, myself and working with other people, I've learned a few things about how you can learn Ceph. The best one is the first one, and actually reading Sage's paper. So Sage with some other, professors and things are part of the paper. If you just Google Ceph, Sage, Ceph paper or something, it should come up. But I do have the URL here in the deck when you get it. The other thing that a lot of people benefit from is, setting up a cluster that you can work with for an extended period of time. So, things like upgrades, actually storing a lot of data in whatever protocol it is, and sort of, long-term maintenance is the kind of skills that you would need if you were going to use this in a more professional environment. Bare metal is ideal. Obviously, you can do it on VMs as well. The the least friction-y approach would be to use CentOS. We won't get into any CentOS debates today, but CentOS streams with just our packages from Ceph is the best approach, with the least amount of challenges. And obviously, we're more than happy to talk to you about if you want to use the commercial products. And we give out subscriptions for you to try it and things like that before you have to buy. So yeah, we'll dig into a little more into the technology. I'm assuming that some people might have some exposure to Ceph, but probably the majority do not. So for those of you that are somewhat experienced in Ceph, you might want to, you may not find it as informative, but for those that haven't been exposed to it too much, these slides might be useful. I would say from a broad sort of perspective, this is all about open source software on commodity hardware, kind of replacing your traditional storage enterprise-y type products that you might use. So this is really about, I guess some might say, building a storage solution the way that like a public cloud would do it. So for those of you that work at large organizations that are wanting to build a cloud or have built a cloud, want to do hybrid cloud type stuff, then it makes a lot of sense. It's as with anything, it's not the right solution for everybody in every situation, but if you want to cost effectively build something at scale that sort of does general purpose object block and file, it makes a lot of sense. I would say would be my sort of elevator pitch there. And I won't spend a ton of time on this slide, but this is just kind of some marketeering type of thing where, these are the important features that, if maybe you're looking at some other open source software solution, these are where Ceph kind of stands out, is all of these different categories. Probably one of the bigger ones is the object block and file. So I talked a little bit earlier about Gluster. Gluster was really based on a file system. A lot of the traditional file system, methodologies involved, right? They did have the ability to do other protocol, and Waffle has that as well in NetApp, for instance. But having a large distributed system that does, all the main protocols that storage systems do is a big draw, because you can build a system that maybe you don't know ahead of time where all your storage demand is going to be, which different types of protocols that it might be, and so you can scale it up and support different use cases. I mean, what we're seeing a lot in the marketplace is that customers are moving to object storage. So there's, you're probably quite familiar with this whole renaissance going on in sort of application development, and the developers are getting better at, I don't know if better is the right word, but they're getting more involved with understanding things at the system level, if you will. And with the public clouds, moving a lot to object storage, on-prem, for instance. I work in the financial services vertical, and a lot of our customers are starting to see the light around doing object storage. In a lot of cases, it's S3. So, Amazon is kind of setting the market, which is good, and, there's some positives and negatives to that, but, we're seeing a lot of customers that say, if I design this app to use S3 object storage, I can run it in Amazon relatively easily, but then there's drivers to keep it on-prem, so you need a cost-effective, good S3 type object solution on-prem. So, Red Hat Ceph Storage is a great solution to try to build that cost-effective S3 object store on-prem, and we have one of the more advanced, I would say, S3 compatible object stores out there with our RHUG gateway, which we'll get to.
Quick question.
Of course.
When you say remove hardware, how's it compensate for that? You remove your hardware, doesn't affect these systems or what?
Yeah, so in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about the design, and it'll probably become relevant there that there's the way that it distributes data within the system. There's some rule-based data distribution within Ceph, and so it gives you the ability for a node to go offline on purpose or because of a failure, and then the automation within the system will allow you to ensure you have the right amount of data, whether it's you're doing traditional copies of data or erasure encoding. So the design and architecture are kind of what gives you the ability to have nodes go offline, and no single point of failure and all those sorts of things. Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about the architecture design, could you please address the hybrid environment in which we may have in-house and AWS file systems combined together, and also
Sure. Yeah.
and also how does it work in serverless environment?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Some of that might become, clear throughout the presentation, but my quick comment to you would be that the way that Red Hat sees hybrid cloud, we actually refer to it as the open source hybrid cloud, is basically you run OpenShift everywhere. That's how we define hybrid cloud. And OpenShift on different platforms like Amazon, like Azure, can take advantage of the native services like serverless and like the object store within a public cloud and things. So I think some of that will become evident throughout the presentation. And that second product that I mentioned, ODF, is OpenShift Data Foundation. So it's really about making the data abstraction consistent. So if you're running on Amazon, if you're running OpenShift on Amazon, then your data abstractions and all your configurations are all just consistent wherever you're running OpenShift. So, but yeah, well, feel free to follow up. So yeah, there's a couple sort of base technologies or base components to Ceph. One of the main ones is what we call the Cephmon, or monitor process here that's highlighted. So with Ceph being a large distributed system, there's a need for consensus. And actually, over the years with all the blockchain things, people have actually learned that consensus is important. But Ceph has been doing it quite a while with a somewhat unique Praxis algorithm that was implemented with the Cephmons. And this is usually 3 or 5 in some cases mons, and that's why we have 3 mons highlighted here. And basically they have a vote and they have a leader defined, and traditional consensus type of approach. The other unique thing is that there's cluster maps. So there's a map of all the OSDs, or all the what we call object storage devices or object storage daemons within the cluster. So the monitor keeps track of this consensus, as well as what nodes are in the cluster and whatnot as well. Oh, it says object storage daemons right there. So the next piece that kind of builds on this is what we call the OSDs, and in Sage's paper, I'm pretty sure it refers to it as the object storage devices, but it has eventually been called object storage daemon because it's a daemon process in the underlying OS. And this is really the piece that talks directly to the storage media, whether that's virtualized storage media or actually real physical storage media. And there's been a few different ways that it communicates with the storage media. And the storage media could be partitioned, or it could be the raw devices. In the newer way that we do it, it is generally the raw devices. And the diagram isn't great at showing this, but usually it's a one-to-one relationship. So you usually have one device and one OSD process. It kind of looks like there's 3 devices for each OSD process here, but it is usually a one-to-one relationship. So you have one OSD process per, and so that's, the scale really comes from the object storage daemons. So the mons, as we said, are a smaller odd number. The OSDs are the ones that scale. And when we talk about scale in Ceph, we're usually referring to the amount of OSDs. So, 10,000 OSDs is a pretty legit scale.
Excuse me. Is there like you said, odd numbers for the monitors, but is there like a set baseline for the amount of monitors, or does it scale to spawn more?
It's really an administrator type of defined thing. In a lot of, like, say, proof of concepts, people get away with 1, but that's not ideal for most situations. There is some scaling limitations, but at least initially most people don't hit them, so most people stick with 3. But there is cases where some people will go 5. The important thing is that you try to put them in different failure domains, right? So you try to, if a rack is your main failure domain, you put 1 mon in each rack. That way you're a bit more resilient to say, a rack level failure. I don't think there's much useful here. So once we've gone over the basics, which are the OSDs and the mons, these are kind of the main building blocks for Ceph. Then we kind of introduced this concept of RADOS. So it stands for Reliable Autonomous Distributed Object Store. So this is kind of the Ceph cluster, if you will, at the base level. And we have this idea of storing RADOS objects. And this is a lot that is covered in the paper from Sage. But basically the thing you need to understand here is that RADOS objects aren't really like what you would consider as traditional cloud object storage. These are more like an object storage construct that you use in programming. So the objects can be a variety of sizes that are set by usually the higher level services. And they're not just append only, which is usually what a cloud object store type solution would be. This is a strongly consistent system that ensures data integrity as one of its sort of cap theorem approaches. So once you get relatively into Ceph, you sort of need to understand the RADOS level stuff. And I'll just point out that the autonomous is the important part. So a lot of the smarts that we were talking about before that allow you to lose a node or for things to happen automagically is at this sort of RADOS level. And once you know what RADOS is, then it's important to know what the crush algorithm is. So it stands for controlled replication under scalable hashing. So basically what it is you're going to basically store RADOS objects in the system. And we actually use the name usually of the RADOS object. And again, the higher level services that are built usually handle all this for you. So this is really about just giving you some information so you know what's going on under the hood. But this is really a lot of the computer sciencey piece. So, in your traditional like Lustre or other systems, you have like a metadata server. So this is instead of having like a metadata server, right? You have an algorithm that computes both how to store and then in the reverse does the same thing. It computes how to, serve data or, store data or retrieve data in the system. And so you're not doing any lookups, and you're not, going through a gateway like you would maybe in a traditional system. And it's repeatable. There's a reference here to pseudo-random, and the reason it's pseudo-random is because of one of the other points here where you have a rule set, and this rule set is usually based on the topology of the cluster. So this is like laying out your topology. So you might have rooms in your data center, or you might have halls, and then you have further from that maybe rows and then racks. You define all this in what we usually refer to as the crush map, and that allows, for instance, if you say 3 replicas of data, it can put 1 copy in each of the 3 different failure domains. So that's how this sort of technology works. It's one of those things that is a little bit hard to explain, but once you've had some exposure and some practical use with it, you get it. And so those are pretty much all of the sort of, I guess I would say, Ceph cluster pieces. The next thing that Sage and a lot of the core maintainers did was build some libraries so they could actually, make useful things and do useful things with the system. So, and as you might expect, they called it LibRados. So LibRados is what most of the higher level services for object lock and file are built with. Actually, in the Inktek days, we had quite a lot of people doing LibRados development. So I would say that's somewhat trickled off a little bit as we've been part of Red Hat and sort of more focused on the enterprise. We had a lot of, I guess you might say, harder core users that maybe didn't stay on as Red Hat customers, but they did very deep sort of LibRados development. So this is the way that you would interact with the system if you really wanted to not take advantage of the object block and file higher level services, but wanted to develop directly within Ceph. And there's a bunch of languages, of course, that those libraries use. The C++ one was the one that I think got the most traction initially. The Lua one actually had a lot of interesting development, especially around things where you would push compute down to the OSDs. And then, of course, Java, Python, the traditional, typical ones. And so now there's the 3 higher level services that handle block, object, and file. And initially Swift was a big object storage solution, which was part of OpenStack, still is part of OpenStack. But S3 has really become more prominent as time goes by. So we have these gateways that we call Rados gateways that basically implement the object storage APIs so that you can store cloud objects that eventually get stored in Ceph as Rados objects. They're actually striped as smaller Rados objects, but and I guess the best commercial pitch that I would use is that we have a testing suite for S3, so the guys have a toolkit that they use to test the S3 compatibility, and we've heard through the grapevine over the years that a lot of competitors that want to have S3 compatibility will take our open source tooling and use it to test their S3 compatibility. So that's kind of one of the commercial pitches that we use about how decent our S3 is. I mean, everybody's reverse engineering and re-implementing everything that Amazon does. for S3, but we have a pretty good solution or competency in that area. And the next one is what we call RBD, or RADOS block devices. So these are when you want to present a block device from Ceph to a client. And obviously this is quite useful in both virtualized environments or containerized environments. There's a couple different ways to do it. There's a librados, so there's actually a library that was built on top of RBD that you can use. And then there's a kernel RBD. The general reason for that is for any of you that are familiar with Linux kernel development, it's not easy. It's a big project, and it takes a lot of work and effort to do things in the kernel. But we've made a lot of steps over the years to make the KRBD, which is the Linux kernel RBD module, pretty feature complete with librados, and actually OpenShift and Kubernetes for the majority of stuff use KRBD now. So that's been one of the big drivers for a lot of that. Several years ago, librd was much more feature rich than KRBD, but that's just a slight aside. Some of you might notice iSCSI mentioned there. This is one of the more traditional or legacy protocols, as you might expect. We leverage a bunch of the Linux pieces to do iSCSI, and it is in the commercial product, but I would say it's not a focus. We try to move customers towards a more modern way of doing things, because when you use some of these longer term technologies like iSCSI or NFS, you inherit all of the things from whatever 30 or 40 years that these things have been around. And the other piece, or the third pillar at the top of Ceph, is the actual file system, which was actually the focus of a lot of Sage's initial work. A lot of the grant money was actually around actually doing file system stuff. So, and this is a very scalable file system, and a bunch of stuff in the initial paper talks a lot about the dynamic metadata stuff within CephFS, and so that's where a lot of the interesting technology is as well. I would say the main approaches are the fuse and the kernel approach. So there's another kernel module that's actually for CephFS. And if folks are needing NFS, they're usually using it with CephFS. What I mentioned before was there's a different kernel module for CephFS than there is for RBD. And so that's basically the sort of architectural high-level stuff around Ceph. The rest of my slides on Ceph are basically just ripped from some slides that we go into customers and talk about RHCS5. So we've numbered the releases. Basically, the ink tank version was kind of like 1.0, and so we've had 2, 3, 4 releases of Red Hat Ceph Storage. If you want a little bit of history, the reason it's called Red Hat Ceph Storage is because when they did the Gluster acquisition, they called it Red Hat Storage, and then when they did the ink tank acquisition and they had Gluster, they weren't sure what to do, so they called it Red Hat Gluster Storage and Red Hat Ceph Storage, and so we had these RHCS, RHGS. So if you're ever confused, if you see Red Hat Storage somewhere, it's from a legacy a little bit. So the RHCS5 was a relatively big release for us, and these are basically the functional areas. And of course, a lot of this came from customer feedback. So I'll just quickly run through these areas. Functionality, security, performance, and efficiency are kind of the areas that the team focused on. when they shipped the most recent one earlier this year. So we introduced a bunch of manageability features and functionalities, which basically we introduced this new like orchestration type solution. And so if you're familiar at all with previous releases, we leveraged Ansible a lot, but now there's an orchestrator that's actually built into Ceph, so we don't actually leverage Ansible to do the deployments of Ceph. And by default, everything's containerized and whatnot, so Ansible was less really required, I would say. Erasure encoding in CephFS, that was a big one for a lot of people. We originally brought erasure encoding with object storage, and then because normally you keep like replicas of data within Ceph, 2 or 3 in most cases, but a lot of people, especially at a large scale, want to use some sort of erasure encoding algorithm instead. Some of the snapshot geo-replication stuff has been quite important as well. I do want to have time to get to ODF, so I will maybe try to go a little quicker. Ceph has had a little bit of, I would say, not being known as the sort of best high-performance solution. So a lot of our competitors have historically benefited a little bit by, you know, if you have a niche solution, it's going to perform better, right? You know, one of the downsides of supporting object block and file and having a big distributed system is, you know, you pay a penalty for that, right? So there's been a lot of work that's gone into improving performance, especially performance at scale, which is hard. Security, which, you know, is more popular with customers maybe in the Washington area, but it is usually pretty important for the financial firms as well, and maybe others. But there's things like, you know, being able to turn on FIPS on the nodes that are running Ceph. Worm is a pretty important feature for a lot of customers, especially in financial services, maybe where you have to retain data for quite a long time. I would point out that this S3 object locking functionality, it is about Worm functionality. It isn't Worm certification, so to speak. We are working on that, and we I think probably with RHCS 6, we'll hopefully have a certified Worm solution. It's hard for software vendors, and there's a bunch of different organizations that kind of govern a bunch of this stuff. So it's, as a lot of you probably know, especially financial services, it's a very, you know, geo-specific with regulations and different things. So it's a complicated topic, which I'm actually not the expert on. We have others that are. One thing you might be interested in, and we do find it does resonate with a lot of customers, and it's actually marked as a future feature here, but I do know it's a focus of a lot of folks, is, you know, having data on-prem stored within Ceph and then tiering it out to the public cloud storage somewhere, because obviously they do things in quite a cost-effective way and easier on-ramps. So that is coming. I think that, again, that'll probably land in RHCX 6 as well. And this is just a summary slide of all those things we've already talked about. I wasn't sure how this would show up on the big screen, but a common question I get after I go through all this craziness is, well, that's great, your software looks cool, but what do I actually run it on, right? So if I want to do bare metal, you know, what kind of nodes should I buy? So this is kind of the one-pager that we use. You'll notice it's not specific to any particular hardware vendor, so whatever hardware vendor you prefer, you know, you can kind of take this and buy a bunch of 2U servers basically, and start running Ceph on them. So this helps a lot with working with customers. So you can digest that at your leisure when you get the deck. The other question we get a lot is, well, how do you actually do the subscriptions? Because most of the Red Hat products are based on cores and that sort of thing. ODF, which we still have to talk about, is done in that traditional Red Hat way. Ceph is a little unique where we actually do a capacity type approach. So we take the capacity of your clusters and give you an entitlement based on that. This is a harder thing to enforce for us within Red Hat because it deviates from the standard way that we usually do it. So in a lot of cases, I think this talk might be recorded, but I'm not sure. It's somewhat of a gentleman's agreement, but when you deal with these large organizations, they want to be compliant anyways. So it's not, we don't find a big drawback. And then just a few more details around, we have a pretty good consulting group, both folks that were part of Cluster Inc., as well as people that came over from Tech like myself, who were originally in consulting, as well as a lot of folks in tech support. We have a lot of good people there. And we do, this is sort of unique. I think they introduced it in our HCS 4, but actually extended life support is sometimes extended life cycle support, I should say, is an option for customers as well. Okay, so the Ceph stuff is over, and I have a little bit of time left in my first hour. As Patrick mentioned, we have iterated here a little bit on the name. And it's really about persistent storage, so persistent data within your Kubernetes, or in the Red Hat parlance, OpenShift. So it's about providing a consistent way of accessing data within an OpenShift environment. Persistent data, I should say. Most companies start their Kubernetes or OpenShift journey with non-persistent apps, and then eventually get to the point where they actually need persistent data within their platform. So again, as with any Red Hat product, we talk about the open source upstream projects that we base our products around. And ODF is a bit unique, but not that unique, because products like Linux and OpenShift, and to a certain extent OpenStack, they're really like pulling together a bunch of different open source projects, right? So we've talked a lot about Ceph, but the NYRHUG project is a storage operator project that isn't specific just to Ceph, but Ceph was kind of the first storage technology that they worked on implementing with. And Nuba is a company from Israel that we acquired, but then we named the upstream open source community Nuba. So you might be familiar that Red Hat a lot of times does acquisitions of companies that have proprietary technology, and then they sometimes quickly, sometimes a little bit slower than some of us would like, actually open source the technology. And so the Nuba is basically the community, and the product, it's a sub-product of ODF now. So I won't spend too much time here, but go and research the NYRHUG project if you want. It's a great project. It actually started, there's a company called, I think Upbound is the name of the company. They're actually more popular for another open source project they have called Crossplane. But there's some really great folks there. And they were the ones that actually started the NYRHUG project. There's a lot of Red Hatters, obviously, that work on it now. But so it's a very good project. And we won't spend much time on this, but this is just the overall architecture, and you'll see a lot of those components at the bottom are related to what we've already talked about with Ceph. So this just gives you an idea of NYRHUG basically sets up a bunch of pods in Kubernetes / OpenShift, right? And so there's a pod for all these different components, basically. And it's, kind of complicated, but it's basically doing the initial deployments as well as a lot of the day 2 and automated type work. So it's complicated because it does a lot of things. And Nuba, I won't get into too much detail, but I mentioned that it's a subcomponent, and the subcomponent is multi-cloud object gateway, we call it, within ODF. So ODF is this term that might be new to some of you. The MCG is a basically subcomponent of that is focused just on object storage. So this is really about providing different object storage and abstracting it in a way that you don't need to change your apps, but you can, put different copies in different object storage solutions and things. That's kind of the 10,000-foot view of it. And this is just the mission statement. So sometimes it's good to have like a mission statement for when you're trying to, ship a product and do something useful. So, and it kind of does a good job of explaining why we don't call it really storage anymore. It's about consuming storage at the infrastructure layer, but then giving high-level services to the platform. In this case, it's OpenShift, but giving the object block and file types higher-level services, and there's more to come, like DR, things like that. And so this is just a visual representation of that. So the spot that ODF is kind of positioned is irregardless of what platform you're using, and this can be, believe it or not, mainframes and PowerPC now that we have a large shareholder that does a lot of that business. But the whole point here is that anywhere OpenShift runs, you can run ODF, and that will give you, you're not exclusively tied into it, but it hopefully will give you all of the storage abstractions that you need. And I'll pull up the OpenShift console so you'll see it live. But the point of this is that what the product folks did, and to a certain extent we did this with OpenShift. So if you're familiar at all with the Red Hat version of OpenStack, it was called OSP, or it still is called OSP. We did a lot of tight integration with SAF, trying to get the storage and the compute together. But now we're taking it, I think, to an even better level where leveraging the operators, which are part of Kubernetes and part of OpenShift, we're able to really build a very I can't stop using the complementary name, but adjacent product, just like we have a security product that's kind of adjacent to OpenShift. Go ahead. We have this sort of data complementary project. And just so you understand where the different technologies are used, the block is mainly NYRHUG and SAF. The file is NYRHUG and SAF as well, but then the object storage, we've got the dotted line here, and it sort of shows that the object storage piece is handled by that Nuba technology that I mentioned. It can use the object storage, so when you're on-prem, it will most likely use the RGW, the RADOS gateway, for object storage, but it doesn't have to. In a lot of cases, like when you're running it on Amazon, it's using the native S3 to actually store the data. And just a slide here that kind of gives you an idea of what platforms we're on and where we're going. So, as I mentioned, we're trying to get ODF basically on everything that OpenShift will run on. And so you see the big normal public clouds, as well as IBM Cloud, as well as OpenStack, Rev, all the different VMware is obviously a big one as well. And we've gotten to the point now where it runs well in a disconnected environment and runs well in, proxied environments, which a lot of people care about. And one more piece of complexity is that we have two modes. One mode is called internal. So it's ODF internal, where everything runs within the OpenShift environment. So you spin up the ODF operator within OpenShift, and you have this like storage system in ODF. And you'll understand why we call it that when you look at what we call external mode. So because RHCS, the sort of standalone Ceph product, has been around much longer, we do have a lot of customers that have big Ceph clusters, and so they don't want to run Ceph inside of OpenShift. They actually want to use and leverage the Ceph, environments that they have. So we have a version of OGF called external mode, which allows you to, there's some pods that live in Kubernetes OpenShift, but then the actual data, and it's sort of connected to the Ceph cluster. So if you've built a large Ceph cluster in your environment, you can very easily basically configure ODF to point at that. And again, we're just trying to educate you on the product. It's basically, trying to satisfy all of your storage requirements within OpenShift. That's the pitch. And if you're familiar at all with Kubernetes and OpenShift, there's, different access modes that you use on like persistent volumes. And so we can, we do a good job of satisfying all those requirements. And if you're familiar at all, we have something called OpenShift Platform Plus, which is like a bundled product, basically OpenShift plus a bunch of products. And we have a version of ODF in there called Essentials. So Red Hat OpenShift Data Foundation Essentials is basically all of the main functionality of the product. And we have a different sort of entitlement subscription that gives you some what we call advanced functionality. And so this is things like being able to encrypt things and have a key manager for the encryption, and actually share the ODF across multiple OpenShift clusters, and sort of things that once you're further down the line, if your organization happens to be a big OpenShift customer, these are the advanced functionalities you might take advantage of. But you most likely would not take advantage of these early in your OpenShift journey, if you will. So I'm going to stop talking. If anybody has questions, I'm going to fire up the demo and hopefully not screw it up.
Just a quick note, the food cutoff is 6 o'clock, so if you're going to order more food, you got around 7 minutes, 6 minutes.
Is it still $20, or did they get an increase?
So far, I'm trying to figure that out right now.
Okay. I'll let everyone know that maybe 20 was a little low.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we have a demo system, and so I this afternoon just got it to fire up an OpenShift cluster for me. So if you're at all familiar with OpenShift, you should be familiar with this console. I'll just point out a few things before we install. Basically, we're installing the operator for ODF. So before I install the operator for ODF, I'll point out a few things that aren't there, so that when I actually install the operator, you'll see that they're there. So you notice there's no mention of storage here in the main status bar. When we go to the storage tab over here, you'll see there's just the out-of-the-box storage classes. So these are, this is in Amazon, so these are the standard out-of-the-box storage classes that you get when you fire up an OpenShift cluster on Amazon. So basically, from there we'll go to the operators, and I'll just point out that we only have the update operator installed, so we'll actually go over here to the operator hub and click on what we call OpenShift Data Foundation Operator. And you can see the version of OpenShift is 4.9, and so the versioning of ODF is sunk up with the same, so it's 4.9. So we're basically just going to take all the defaults and install the operator. And it doesn't take that long. There's a step that we have to take after the operator's installed, which basically just fires up a actual Ceph cluster underneath. So we'll basically just let this run. If you're familiar with Kubernetes, a modern version of Kubernetes or OpenShift, you'll know that operators are a big piece of it. So that's kind of the way you install stuff in the modern way. It's somewhat debated in the community, I think, but definitely from a Red Hat perspective, it's all about the operators. Mm-hmm.
I actually think there's a pending NYRHUG here that I can show you. It does show up in the console. Actually, 410 is the current shipping version, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know about this time or next
So
time.
there's a bit of complexity around that because, and that's actually an OpenShift person that should probably talk to you about it. But there's like a catalog that it uses to know, like, it's kind of like a repo file you might think of. It's related to OpenShift. So either Patrick or myself, we can get your name and have someone follow up with you.
Yeah, tennis. No, tennis. Tennis.
Is it a contact?
No, him, not me.
Yeah, we're $20. We've got a lot of customers too. Yeah, so the lines of delineation are still, we want customers to be successful with OpenShift, so whether they're
doesn't over 20 give it
doing it via IBM, they're coming with us,
Maybe not small, write it down, put it up. Hit that button, I'll come back.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, so I'm gonna do actually a last call at 6 o'clock, because I can bring more.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks still on the, and it's probably pretty common a lot actually. There's a lot of folks within Red Hat that want us to keep our independence.
There's a chance to do. They were fixing them.
The other choice was chocolate.
How come all can be
Okay, so there's an alert here, and I kind of alluded to it before, that ODF makes some changes to the interface, and so that's what this particular alert is saying, that the web console actually has changes to the interface. So you have to click on refresh in order for it to actually have those changes
actually show up. So now that we said refresh, go ahead.
Let me interrupt 1 second. All right, $25.
Oh, no problem. One more thing.
I have teenage kids, so very similar process with that. So I'll quickly point out a few things. Probably the biggest thing that you'll notice is that there's an OpenShift Data Foundations sort of tab in here now. So underneath the storage pull down, and this used to be integrated with the actual overall main console, but now we have a dedicated console for OpenShift Data Foundation here. So I did mention that there's like a second step. So installing the operator is only the first step. We actually need to create what we call a storage system. And you'll see, this is where we actually select the server, or like the instances where it actually runs. So we're going to use the existing storage class. So this is the storage class that ODF will leverage to give us, to actually like provision the disks virtually. And you'll notice if I start selecting nodes here for it to run the ODF services on, it'll tell me that I need at least 3. And the reason for that is all the stuff we talked about before where you need like 3 mons and whatnot, right? So what I usually do is you want to try to get a node in different like zones, right? So we have different availability zones so that we're distributing the services as well as the data across the 3 different zones within AWS. Even though it's in the same region, US east of Amazon, it's still useful to try to distribute it across zones. And again, we'll take all the defaults here, and it will take a little bit of time to spin it up, and the way that you see that is just through the activity here. So we'll just kind of let that run. What it's actually doing in the background is it's grabbing container images from the registry and spinning up the services with those container images, and then doing some like persistent volume requests to actually get some drives that it actually uses both with the mons and with the OSDs, and then all of the related services. The way I actually know it's done is you'll see under the status, there will be a new entry there that tells us basically that the storage system is up. So just having the operator doesn't actually give you a Ceph cluster under the covers. You actually do need this sort of second step.
One question I'll hear you. Do you see an advantage of using ODF in cloud environments? If you have your cluster open in AWS, and you decide it's like cloud storage provider of that, what's the purpose of using it when you are already in a cloud environment?
The thing that's resonated most with customers, I would say, is that it just allows you to have a consistent architecture both on-prem and in the public cloud. So that's probably the biggest sort of reason, is that you can have the same architecture on-prem, and you can have, like, if you're fortunate to have availability zones on-prem, then you can architect your solution with those availability zones, and then you can replicate the same thing in the public cloud, right? So you don't have to rely on the public cloud, or you give it a certain level of resilience on top of what might be offered by the public. I don't know if it's still the case, but one example would be that EBS usually doesn't span zones, right? Whereas when you use ODF, your RVDs can be accessed through the different zones, right? So there's certain feature functionality that when you're building an OpenShift cluster, if you include ODF, your architecture is very consistent no matter where you're running. Yeah, so by default, in most Ceph clusters, the majority of Ceph clusters, by default you get 3 copies of data. Some customers choose to tone that down or tune it down to say 2 or whatever, but in that model you usually choose 3 different availability zones, and it stores a copy in each of those, and it's all handled auto-magically with some of those technologies that we talked about with the crush algorithm and all that stuff. So that's within a data center, if you will, right? It's very much a data center scale where you're doing that synchronous replication, right?
The geo-replication pieces are different. Those are more administrator set up policies where you want to replicate this data from the object service to another site or whatever, and that's a replication process that you configure as an administrator and then you monitor it. And the same technology exists for block and file as well, based on snapshots.
So what happens if you run an edge application for one of these, because like the West Coast and the Midwest,
My meal was 17 plus drink was 7.
So, yeah, so those replication technologies usually have, or do have the ability to tier or to replicate to multiple locations. So you can have a primary site in the east and replicate, to the West Coast or to the Midwest. And there's some other, especially with object storage, there's some other complexities there where you can have like a namespace that spans multiples as well. But for the block and file piece, it's very much a replication like you'd be familiar with other storage systems like a Snap or a Diff. Familiar at all with that.
Is there a level of cost data or cold data?
It's the hot and cold, and usually what folks refer to as tiering has been something that has not really developed too much and stuff. I did mention early at one point in the presentation about customers wanting to tier to the public cloud, tier some data to the public cloud. That was very specific to object storage. So there is that functionality that's actually in the community today, and it'll be in the downstream productized version soon, like I said, probably with RHCS6. But
I would say in general, hot and cold data tiering, usually people set up different pools, right? And so we didn't even get into that side of the architecture and stuff, but there's this idea of pools. Very familiar, or very similar maybe to thin provision pools in storage arrays. So you can set up different pools that have different performance characteristics and then just point clients at different pools, right? It's kind of a manual tiering type approach. That's really the only thing that's, I would say, prevalent and common with Ceph.
So any of the customers have been building edge applications?
So there's this thing called, the telco folks would be there. As I briefly mentioned, I usually work with financial services, but the telco folks are very focused in that area. There's different technologies involved. One of them, though, that's interesting is what we call single node OpenShift. I don't know if I can remember the acronym for that. So it's basically OpenShift on a single node. We call it single node OpenShift. It doesn't leverage ODF and it doesn't leverage other things because it uses like an LVM type solution. So it's very much like a standalone, runs on small hardware in the edges and stuff, but you can still manage it, for instance, with ACM. It's a real OpenShift cluster, but it's running on one node. So for a lot of edge applications, it's either single node OpenShift or it's a very stripped down, like 3-node cluster, because etcd within Kubernetes does require, 3 nodes as well for its consensus and whatnot. So I would say in the majority of cases, it's either single node OpenShift or small clusters like 3-node OpenShift, which you don't have to use ODF with, right? You can just use local disk if you want, right? You could use ODF if you wanted to. I would say, and I kind of alluded to it earlier in the presentation, Ceph in a lot of ways is geared at people building cloud infrastructure.
Right. But at the same time, people are using more and more mobile. So if your company has both web applications, but then at the same time you want to have your company's applications work on mobile, then you have to have both, right? So you have to cloud for your browser base when they're at home, but then it should be synchronous with their mobile app.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of the Ceph stuff is as well like big data analytics type stuff, right? So it's less so about the maybe limited connectivity edge and telco and all that. It's another niche where I would say Ceph is probably not the ideal technology for. But I can always be surprised. So I'll just point out that it does look like see how it says here has one storage system now within ODF. The other thing I would just point out is we introduced this idea of object bucket abstraction. So we've added, and it's actually in the newer versions of Kubernetes, but customer, or I would say both customers and community users of Kubernetes have been, this is the similar type of abstraction to persistent volumes, right? But it's in an object storage context. So in this case, you make an object bucket claim instead of making a persistent volume claim. So we've kind of introduced that, and I think it's getting traction, and over time, I think it'll take off even more. But the main thing I usually point out here is that now it's added 3 storage classes, and the CephFS one is for file system stuff. So this is where when a client of your OpenShift cluster is making a persistent volume request, they could use this storage class to get a file system type persistent volume. And then the RBD one is for block. And then the other one, which has the Nuba name in it, of course, is the one for the object bucket claims, the object bucket requests. So I don't think there's much more to show you here. I was also going to just show you under the covers, because some people like to see under the covers. So I will quickly show you the Ceph cluster under the covers, and then I think we'll be done. Kind of get close. So this is a tool that actually we don't, our tech support folks use, but it at least will show you, and for those of you that have actually played with Ceph, you might be familiar with how it looks, but I'll just, it's a little ugly, but let's just try. I liked the good old days of middle clicking with a mouse. So now if we do like a Ceph-S, which is kind of the standard if you played with a Ceph cluster. So this is under the covers of ODF. And we talked about things like the Mons. We've got 3 Mons. We've got 3 OSDs. Our health is good. And then we do like a Ceph OSD tree, which is a traditional Ceph command. You can see, remember we selected these nodes to actually run the services on. So we've got, this is the crush map, basically. You've got a host and a zone. So it's, by default, it's storing 1 copy of data in each of these different OSDs, OSD 0, OSD 1, OSD 2. So that's it, I think. Just go back. Yeah, of course. We always, everything since I started working with Ceph always was like Ceph and then a subcommand. I do know that with, for instance, Kubernetes, we use OC for OpenShift instead of kubectl. For whatever reason, we always get a little bit of flack for that. But with the productized enterprise version of Ceph, we still use the command Ceph. And I made a promise that I would point everybody to the meetup, but you probably registered there to get here in the first place, so. Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much, Sheldon. It was very detailed. So it's always good to have somebody that's been working with the tech for a long time to kind of give you where we've been and all the details of it. Okay, so we're wrapping up soon. So we promised Alamo that we will be out of here by 6:30. So that gives us 15 minutes to kind of wrap up and chat. Swag-wise, if you didn't get one of the, so last month we had glass mugs. This month we have these weird squishy plastic ones. So if you didn't get one of those, they're by the door on the way out. I think we got everybody successfully checked in today, unlike last month when we started late and tried to catch up. So, but if you didn't check in, just please grab one of the Red Hat folks here and just let us know, hey, I missed the check-in thing. That's how our people that pay the bills track how many people we had here and all that.
Quiz?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, so we've got a couple of extra pieces of swag here, so I will pass back to Sheldon to do the quiz.
So I guess the first person that shouts out the answer then gets to pick what they want.
Raise your hand and then we'll call it.
Okay. OSD. Does anyone remember what OSD stands for? Yeah, I think the masked fella got it first.
All right, so you got socks, a t-shirt, or a baseball cap?
What was the answer, by the way?
Object storage daemon, but object storage device would also be valid. I alluded to the fact that I'm pretty sure Sage's paper says object storage device. Should I make them harder or easier?
Harder. We want hard one.
What kind of consensus algorithm does the mon use? Yeah. Good.
What do you say?
At least somebody was paying attention. Paxos. It's a type of consensus algorithm. It's actually somewhat old. There's much newer and cooler consensus algorithms. So this one has to be the hardest.
Or you can go back to easier if they don't get a choice.
True.
Socks, in case you were wondering.
What are the 3 high-level services in Ceph?
Object, block, and
More detail? Close enough.
Gateway device file system, though.
Yeah, so it's Rados Gateway for object storage, Rados Block Device for block, and CephFS for the file system. So yeah, I appreciate all your time and thanks for staying away from your wives.
All right. And we always know when speakers do a good job at the Alamo, because if the seats are not all reclined and people are not asleep, then we're doing good. Okay, so as next month goes, I'm going to lobby again, and since we had great attendance today, I think we'll be pretty successful to come back to Alamo next month. I do not have a speaker topic yet, so if we have any requests for Red Hat technology you'd like to hear more about, now's a good time to shout it out, or you can message me through Meetup and say, hey, I would like to hear a talk on blah. Because
Have you had an OpenShift one?
we've had quite a few. We haven't had an OpenShift one recently, so I'm leaning towards doing an OpenShifty thing next month. Yes. Yeah, I don't know how much quantum stuff we have going on.
I would attend that. IBM has a neat toolkit for quantum computing. if we could get someone on the toolkit they use for quantum computing, I would.
Yeah, I have actually a good friend of mine runs the quantum lab in Poughkeepsie, so he would love to come talk about it, but you have to have the official IBM quantum people to come talk about quantum.
It's called like Quick Speed or something. I forget.
I'm not sure what it is.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, but if you have other ideas, I'm always open. That frankly is the hardest thing about doing the Red Hat user group. coming up with topics and finding speakers. Everything else is like,
How about,
you guys make it nice and easy.
How about Red Hat for edge computing?
Yes, actually, that would be a really good one because there's a lot of activity going on at Edge right now.
I can help. I know the guy that
I like
does
that.
storage.
Aha. Okay, that sounds like a possibility. Okay, so we're going to shoot for next month. I think the third week in August. I think I actually have a business trip, so we'll do somewhere in August there. It might be the week before Labor Day. It might be a little bit after that. So follow us on. Make sure you're signed up on the meetup page. If
See
Sheldon.
at the bottom.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Meetup.com.
But if you go look for NYRHUG on the meetup, you should be able to find us there.
And if they send the deck.
Yes.
the type of-
Okay. Oh, yes. That's another good question. I always forget. Okay. So we will be sending the deck around in the for all the registered attendees. You'll get an email with a link to the deck. I'm also going to post it on the meetup page. And so far, it looks like our live stream attempt actually worked this month. Last month, we tried it during Tech Check, and it failed miserably. Or Tech Check worked great, and then it failed miserably when we tried to do the live event. It seems like it actually worked this month, so if you're unable to attend in person for some reason, I'm going to keep trying and keep getting better at it, hopefully, but it seems like the live stream kind of worked this month. So pass the word along to everybody, coworkers, friends, etc., and let them know about us. And I think that's about everything. So thanks, Betty. Appreciate again for our Alamo staff. They did a really great job of taking care of everybody, just like they did last month. And so let's be good to them and help them out by getting out of here on time. So we got 10 minutes before we need to kind of clear out a little bit for them. All right, thanks a lot, and hope to see you next month.
Where did Tino had Ralph?
How long have you been doing this?
He's gonna call somebody. Didn't he have something from 6 to 8? I saw. We were right now. What is it? What's the description? Let's look at it. Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thanks for what you want to do?
We were already on the bubble with Two Sigma. I just can't imagine letting us do it. So I don't know what you do. Another part of your sales.
That's what we're doing.
And I don't know if you've
Sandbox,
I don't know if you still have
like a bar. What is the description?
Yeah, the one EDH, like right near Ground Zero.
That's probably one or the other, right? Well, he may do what he's doing.
Absolutely, after what you put into it.
Yeah, we have
The road to the connect
level RSA.
What's the other one? Oh, this is this looks like it. Oh, that's like a 31st. Right, where 31st you Harold Square. Oh, Harold Square. Okay. Where's the other one? The other one's probably it looks like it's a playground. Is it a playground?
No, I am actually I don't know if you noticed. So I have a very close relationship with the government. I actually think
where did he go?
he wasn't really my course.
Oh, is this
Yes. I don't want to brag.
He held your credit. He didn't go by. He just was scared. He took your credit card? No, he just I think you're right.
Yeah, I
No, it's all good. It's all good. I just want to wait for let's find the guy and give him a yeah, let's do it. I'll give it a
I don't have any singles.
I think you and I are on LinkedIn.
I'll give it to you later.
right, sure, it's okay.
All the things that I love working for you.
I know you're good guy.
The last time you came to
Actually moved that whole chicken thing. I can't believe it.
oh yeah,
I got the veggie burger. I never really get that chicken with the avocado.
yeah, that was good. Yeah, we had a lot of meat yesterday. A lot of work.
That's why I got a vegan burger.
Yeah, we should also. What a contrast we go this versus like a biotech one. You understand so well, like it's like two different worlds.
I'm more of a DOH side.
Yeah. We have your registry. I would take really like hardcore, programming, the coders. Radiance? That's barely 25. I have 17 right now. I don't drink with it. I don't like.
Oh, I know that. I know. I was behind you.
All right.
Yeah, I was behind you. Eventually, you went to work directly for the agency. Or you want to have a
for research around. It's all covered. All right, so you want to call keynote and see what the other one is. The one on Harold Square, that's yeah. So there's a lot of. I'd rather go up there. I would say. Oh no, both places are up there. A lot of folks use that in agency. But I would say it's a poor area. So it's like adding another.
And a lot of people
oh, right. What is it?
well, they get most objects.
Well, what are the other places? They've been surprisingly all over the worthless to go all those tours. I mean, we're going inside. What is the place?
Urban Outfitters.
I almost fell asleep.
Yeah, I know.
And I've popped up. Yeah, last month there was like booming prices coming from the theater. So I have friends who only go see movies now.
1333 Broadway?
So I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah, I think that I
They stopped recording.
but I would say
I was their boss for a while.
The fact that he's going up.
That was like one of the things that I used to do. So I used to run the Proxy division, the TA division where you used to work, and Connie and Lisa, and you know.
Going to fly over the country, you still have like single theaters. Those weren't playing VCR.
I actually have
Where I'm at, we still drive it. Yeah, I'm up there. Oh, all right. Hyde Park doesn't drive it. Is it near where Gaines were?
So that's we do a little bit of sometimes never had their way.
I've been to that state. I'm just saying.
The other thing I would say, if you have customers are no, nobody's wearing masks.
All right, guys, 6:30. We need to bug out. 6:30. Let's go.
You don't have to go home. You can't stay here.
What's the show?
You know what? I'm not going to say anything. I don't know if you have to vacate.
We're gonna stop the stream.
There's the Alamo in my neighborhood. I saw that. And